She was just 6 years old, a pink raincoat on her shoulders, a red balloon tied twice around her wrist. 1 second she was laughing at Sawyer Point, running between shade tents on a spring afternoon. The next, she was gone. No screams, no witnesses, just silence, and a whistle lying in the grass. 20 years later, a knock echoed through the same front door that had stayed waiting all those years. On the porch stood a woman, hazel eyes, a locket missing half its moon, and 2 children clutching her hands. "Mom," she whispered, "I think I'm your daughter." This is the story of a family haunted by an absence, of a woman who grew up not knowing she had been stolen, and of a truth that refused to stay buried. Before we begin, tell me, where in the world are you watching from? I read every single one, and I love seeing your comments and interactions. The first cold rain of October slicked the window glass in Cincinnati, turning the streetlight outside Laura Bennett's kitchen into a trembling coin. She stood barefoot, on tile with a chipped mug in both hands, listening to the house breathe, the hum of the refrigerator, the shy sigh of the hallway board, the radiator whispering. Her radio glowed red digits in the bedroom, volume low enough to sound like someone talking in another life. The cardboard box on the counter had been opened so many times its flaps were soft as fabric. Inside lay 20 years of paper, flyers folded to a palm, police reports with coffee rings, and a child's pink raincoat that still smelled faintly of detergent and attic. Laura had once mended the cuff with thread the color of strawberry milk. The crooked seam ran like a scar. When she touched it, her stomach remembered tying small shoelaces, braiding small hair, whispering, "Hold my hand." Rain ticked steady. A bus hissed past on Madison Road. A dog shook its collar and went quiet. Laura shut the box and slid it aside for her lesson planner. In the morning, she would teach freshmen about imagery, how light behaves in a paragraph, how sound becomes tension. The doorbell rang. 3 knocks followed, precise, evenly spaced, like someone counting time. Laura froze, then glanced at the clock. 9:27 p.m. Nobody came at 9:27, unless it was trouble or kindness. She walked to the door with the mug like an anchor. Through the peephole, the porch became a small stage. A woman stood at the edge of the light, rain stippling a denim jacket. 2 children clung to her legs, 1 boy with a stubborn cowlick, 1 girl with a plastic butterfly barrette, the pink of the old coat. The porch light found the woman's eyes and made them show their color. They were not green or blue, but the quiet hazel Rachel had worn. The woman reached into her pocket and lifted a chain. A half-moon locket swung into view, catching a blink of lightning. Rachel had broken that locket against the backyard maple. The missing crescent had lived for 2 decades in a porcelain bowl by the door. "Miss Bennett," the woman called, voice thin against the rain. "Please." Laura opened the door. Wet air came in with the metallic breath of bus brakes and the older scent of the Ohio River. The little boy held a deflated red balloon by a string tied twice around his fingers, exactly how Laura used to knot Rachel's so it wouldn't float away at Sawyer Point right now. "I didn't know where else to go," the woman said. She was older than the age Rachel had been. Time had done its arithmetic. But the right cheek freckle was there, and the same hesitation before a smile formed, as if permission had to be granted. "What's your name?" Laura asked. "I've had a few," the woman said. She lifted the locket. Rain clicked off the chain. "Someone used to tell me a story about a moon that lost its other half." Laura glanced at the bowl on the entry table. The uneven crescent slept where it always had. She looked at the children instead. "Are you cold?" she asked. "Bridges, not walls." The woman's shoulders softened. "We're okay," she said. "But I think I'm your daughter." The last word scraped out like a lid on a rusted hinge. "My name might be Rachel." The house leaned. The radiator whispered. Laura set the mug down and heard the small ceramic click that made the moment feel recorded. Rain tapped the porch roof. The world waited for the next true thing. "Come in," she said. The woman stepped across the threshold with the children, leaving a dark crescent of water on the floor. The girl stared at the porcelain bowl. The woman followed her gaze and, hand shaking, pressed the shard to the locket. They fit, not as repair, but as proof of belonging. Lightning laced the clouds. Somewhere deeper in the house, Laura heard a faint metallic chirp, like a tiny whistle settling on the floor. She turned toward the sound, realizing it was coming from the closed box on the counter. Laura Bennett was not brave so much as practiced. Practiced at quiet mornings, at driving the same route to the public high school on Erie Avenue, at leaving the radio low so sleep wouldn't catch on sharp edges. She wore sensible shoes and carried a canvas bag with chalk ghosts in its seams. She noticed things, comma splices, bitten nails, the way a lie avoids verbs, because noticing was the only skill grief hadn't taken. 20 years had turned Laura into a collector of rituals because the big rituals had been stolen. Saturdays at Findlay Market, Sundays grading essays with the TV muted. The pink coat stayed in the box, never on a hanger. Hanging meant waiting, and she refused to make the garment keep watch. David, her husband, lived 4 blocks away now. Grief had split the house in ways the marriage couldn't fix. He still came by to mend gutters and the back step, and always asked if she wanted to sell. She said not yet. There had been another child. Emily was 7 when her sister vanished, and 27 now. A nurse who wore her hair up so it wouldn't fall into charts. She loved her mother fiercely, and at angles. Their calls skated on practical ice. Now a woman and 2 children stood in Laura's foyer like travelers off the wrong train. She took coats and shoes, fetched towels. The boy, 6 or 7, squinted at the radiator. "I'm Theo," he said. The girl pressed a butterfly barrette tighter and peered into the porcelain bowl where the crescent lay. "I'm Nora. I'm 5. "Hot chocolate," Laura said, grateful for a sentence with instructions. In the kitchen, the woman hovered in the doorway. Rain silvered the porch. The box on the counter stayed quiet. "What have people called you?" Laura asked, measuring cocoa. It was easier than, "Who are you?" The woman glanced at the locket as if it held answers. "Jenna," she said, "and for a while, Beth." Her mouth fought the next words. "My birth certificate says Rachel Lee Bennett." Laura's knuckles touched the counter, testing whether the world had tilt. "Do you remember this house?" "The maple," the woman said, climbing and catching my shirt on a nail. She frowned at a sound only she could hear. "And a whistle by the back door." A nickel whistle had hung there when the girls were small. "David's idea." Laura nodded. She poured 3 mugs, then a 4th by habit truly. The woman took hers with both hands, as if warmth could prove something. "Where did you come from tonight?" "Greyhound," she said, "from Charleston, West Virginia. We had tickets to Chicago." She looked startled by her own honesty. "I got off early." Theo asked if radiators burn. Nora asked if butterflies melt. Ordinary questions slid in like light, and Laura felt her voice return. The woman studied the magnets. A pizza calendar, Emily's 8th grade photo, a paper moon from a 2nd grader. "Did I make that?" "You and your sister," Laura said. "You wanted to reach the moon with a ladder." "That sounds like me," the woman said, and something bright and shy moved through her voice. Sawyer Point returned. A Saturday in May, shade tense, the pink coat because the sky couldn't decide, a red balloon tied to a small wrist so Laura could pay a vendor. Looking up to find the balloon, but not the child. Since then, every sentence had been about finding or failing. "I know I look like her. That isn't evidence," the woman said, tracing the locket with her thumb. "But there are things I remember no one told me. A lullaby about the river, orange slices at halftime, an oak dresser with 2 sticky drawers, and the word you use when you want someone to try again. You say, 'Once more, please.'" Headlights pressed the curtains. A key turned. David stepped in, hair wet from the short jog, and stopped at the sight of strangers and the locket, bright under the kitchen light. "David," Laura said, "this is—" The woman stood. "Sir," she said, voice both practiced and fragile, "I think you're my dad." He looked at Laura the way people look at a cliff and a bridge. He nodded once, slow, and stepped toward the table. "If you're Rachel," he said carefully, "tell me the joke we told each other at Sawyer Point." The woman swallowed. "What did the river say to the bridge?" Her eyes shone. "Nothing. It just waved." David closed his eyes. When he opened them, something in them had settled. Before anyone could speak, the door opened again. Emily, scrubs under a raincoat, hair pulled high, took in the scene, chest rising as if she'd run up the steps. She looked from the woman to the locket to her parents. "Tell me," she said, breathless. "Tell me I'm not seeing what I think I'm seeing." The box did not whistle so much as breathe out a memory. When Laura lifted the lid, something small rolled and clicked, a nickel whistle with a dent near the mouthpiece. She hadn't seen it since the weeks after Sawyer Point, when everything that made a sound had been accused of lying. The P rattled once and settled. Laura touched the dent with her thumb. "Your father said it was for safety," she whispered, as if speaking too loudly might scatter the delicate proof gathering in the room. The woman who might be Rachel, Jenna to bus drivers, Beth to a landlord, Rachel on a birth certificate she had never held, watched from the doorway, mug cradled. Rain braided down the glass. In the living room, Theo and Nora sat cross-legged on the rug with a box of old wooden blocks, stacking and toppling with small gasps that rose and fell like another weather. When a tower fell, Nora flinched and looked to the front door as if expecting the sound to bring consequences. Laura's teacher's mind made a note. Flinching is learned. David stood near the sink, hands on the back of a chair the way men hold on to the idea of sturdy things. He kept looking at the locket and the shard, worrying the coincidence from every angle and finding only the shape that fit. "Do you remember this?" Laura asked, offering the whistle. The woman's fingers hovered and then closed. She lifted it to her lips and paused, as if a muscle memory had to load like an old VHS. Then she gave 2 soft notes, a beat, then one long, a pattern David had insisted on teaching the girls. 2 short, 1 long, the family's private SOS. The sound skimmed the kitchen and turned the room into an old photograph. David's chair scraped back. Laura put a hand on the counter to steady the present. "I used it when the ice cream truck got too loud," the woman said, sheepish at her own certainty. "You didn't like how it drowned out my name." In the foyer, Emily had not taken off her coat. She studied the woman the way nurses study monitors, gathering data before Hope gets a vote. "You could have learned that pattern," she said, firm, fair, guarding the little girl in herself, who had learned to sleep without footsteps in the hall. But when she stepped closer, her mouth trembled. "Say mine." The woman turned, searching the air as if the sound of a sister's name might have a drift to it. "M," she said softly. "We called you M because when you cried your chin made the shape of an M." Tension changed temperature. Emily blinked and looked away. "That's a thing anyone could—" She swallowed. "Where did I hide the pencil sharpener so Rachel would stop stealing my eyeliner?" The woman's face turned, mapping the house. She walked to the oak dresser in the hallway, second drawer, right side, the sticky one, slid it open, reached under a nest of instruction booklets, and pulled out a plastic sharpener shaped like a purple cat. She held it level in her palm and didn't smile. Some proofs asked not to be celebrated, only witnessed. The radiator hissed. The rain thinned. From the box, Laura withdrew other fossils. A photocopy of a flyer with Rachel's school photo, gap-toothed Ernest, a city map the police had marked with green highlighter, a cassette from the old answering machine with a piece of masking tape labeled in Laura's hand. May 24th, 3:32 p.m. She remembered what that day had felt like. A floor failing, the geometry of a house changing, so it took twice as many steps to cross a room. "The tape," David said quietly. "The call from an anonymous woman." He looked at Laura. "We never played it again after the first week." "Because it wasn't her," Laura said, and then checked herself. Memory edits to survive. The truth, awkward, undeniable, was that in grief they had become editors of evidence. "Play it," Emily said. The old kitchen radio had a cassette deck. The buttons stuck unless you pressed them like a pianist who had learned late. The tape's magnetic cough filled the room, static like rain inside a throat. A woman's voice came through, Midwestern vowels, deliberate, steadying herself. "I saw the girl from your flyer by the river walk. She got into a blue sedan with a dented left taillight near the Sawyer Point lot at about 3. Please check the security booth. He might have seen. Please." A clatter, then the click of someone panicking at the end of a sentence. "We checked. They had no tape that day," David said. The booth camera had been broken for a week. "Who are you?" Emily whispered to the woman on the call. A question to the radio, to the room, to the stranger who might be her sister. "I've heard that voice," the woman said, quiet, certain, frowning as if the memory had a splinter pushing outward. She bought me a butterfly barrette once, the kind with the spring that pinches your thumb if you're not careful." Nora reached up, pinched her own barrette, and squeaked, surprised by the little pain that proves a thing is real. The woman rubbed the dent in the whistle and looked out at the maple tree, black with water, branches knifing the streetlight. "I remember the back gate latch sticking in summer," she said, "and a smell, orange hand, soap, not here, somewhere with a louder clock." Laura felt the nape of her neck prickle. Long after Rachel disappeared, a neighbor 3 doors down, Mrs. Adler, had moved away. She'd been the sort of woman who borrowed sugar and returned clean Tupperware with homemade cookies inside, the sort who always had a kitchen clock that shouted the seconds. Adler had also worked part-time at a resale shop off Columbia Parkway, the kind of place with racks of outgrown childhood. The flyer stack had included a note, typed, unsigned, suggesting they ask around at New Moon Resale. Laura had circled it, and then never gone, because every shop with a bin of little pink things had turned her lungs into fists. "New Moon," Laura murmured, eyes on the locket's missing crescent. "I thought it was a cruel coincidence." She looked toward the hall where the sticky drawer yawned like a mouth that had finally told one secret. The house had gone still after the whistle. Every breath felt borrowed. Laura forced her eyes to the window, but the cracked tail-light sedan was gone, the street washed clean by the drizzle as if it had never been there. David killed the porch light and whispered, "Phone's on silent." Emily obeyed instantly, setting hers face down on the counter. Even the children, half asleep on the couch, seemed to sense the air had thickened. Theo stirred, frowning, and mumbled, "Mom, did you hear it too?" Rachel's hands trembled as she gripped the locket. "I told myself that sound was mine alone. Now I know it wasn't." She looked at Laura, almost apologizing with her eyes. "Whoever raised me, used that whistle like a leash, and she always said if I tried to leave, someone would come for me." Laura's stomach twisted. "What do you mean, someone?" Rachel shook her head. She never said a name, just someone. Before Laura could press, Emily froze, her eyes locked on the dining table. The manila envelope with the property report had slid to the edge. Papers fluttered, as if brushed by a draft. Yet all the windows were shut tight. David picked it up and frowned. This wasn't here. He turned the paper. On the back, in block letters pressed hard enough to dent, someone had scrawled, "Stop digging." The ink was fresh. Laura's throat closed. She had pulled that envelope straight from the evidence box earlier. No one else had touched it. Rachel's face went pale. She used to write notes like that, leave them on mirrors, on cereal boxes, never signed, but I always knew. She backed toward the wall, as if expecting the wallpaper itself to peel into her past. A sudden creak split the silence. The back door. The latch that always stuck in damp weather gave a half-cough sound, as if forced. David moved first, gripping the heavy flashlight he kept under the sink. He swung the beam across the kitchen. Nothing. Just the glint of raindrops on glass. Then Emily whispered, "Wait. Listen." They all held still. From beyond the fence came the slow crunch of footsteps on wet gravel, measured and patient, circling the yard as if mapping it. A pause. Then a faint metallic scrape, like a key sliding against the wrong lock. Theo whimpered in his sleep. Nora clutched her barrette, the spring squeaking faintly in her small fingers. Laura's pulse hammered in her ears. "Whoever it is," she whispered, "they know this house. They know exactly where to step." Rachel looked toward the children, then to her mother. "If she found me, she won't stop. She never stops." The flashlight beam caught something outside, the swing of the gate. It moved back and forth, though the wind was dead still, and on the damp wood 3 new scratches gleamed raw and pale, as if carved just moments ago. 2 short, 1 long, the family's whistle code gouged directly into the gate. The morning came gray, as if the sky had been erased. Laura barely noticed the hour. She hadn't slept. The whistle carved into the back gate haunted her every blink. The scratches were fresh enough to bead with sap. Whoever had done it had stood in her yard less than 12 hours ago. David brewed coffee with the precision of a man trying to rebuild order. Emily sat at the table in scrubs, though she had called into her shift, first time in years. Rachel hovered near the sink, arms folded tight, eyes darting between her children and the window, as if every reflection might open into another life. "We need Reynolds," David said finally. "He wrote that ticket. He knew the whistle code." Emily shot him a sharp look. "And what if he's part of it? He's the only outsider you ever told." "That was 20 years ago," David argued. "He stayed on the case long after it went cold. He's the reason we even had those flyers printed in every county." Laura spoke quietly. "Call him." An hour later, Detective Mark Reynolds arrived. Time had given him weight in the shoulders, a slower gait, but his eyes still scanned like a man who carried the map of a city in his head. He removed his hat in the entryway, nodded to Laura, then let his gaze settle on Rachel. He didn't blink. "God Almighty," he whispered, "it's you." Rachel's fingers tightened on the locket. "How do you know?" "I don't," Reynolds admitted. "Not yet. But I remember that freckle on your cheek. I remember your eyes when we printed the flyers. They don't change." He looked at the gate through the kitchen window. "But someone else remembers too." They walked him outside. He crouched, tracing the carved whistle pattern with a pen cap. "Clean cuts, metal edge, not weathered. Last night, maybe early morning, whoever did this wanted you to see it before coffee." "Did you tell anyone else about the whistle code?" Emily asked sharply. Reynolds straightened, his jaw tensed. "I mentioned it once to a sergeant, off record. We thought maybe it could help if she ever tried to signal. I never imagined—" He stopped, the unfinished sentence heavier than the rain-damp air. Inside, he spread their evidence across the table. Flyers, the locket shard, the property report. He studied the parking ticket. I wrote this. Sunfire, dented tail light. We never found it. DMV said the car was scrapped, but no salvage record ever turned up. Rachel spoke for the first time since his arrival. It wasn't scrapped. She drove it for years. Blue Pontiac with a crack in the left light. She parked it behind a thrift store called New Moon. Laura's breath caught. "New Moon," she repeated. "We saw that name once." Reynolds scribbled the address from memory. "That place closed 15 years ago. Property sold to a development company, but the building's still there." "Boarded up," he hesitated. "If she raised you, Rachel, she might have left something behind." The children stirred in the living room. Theo clutched the whistle, fascinated by the dent, blowing short puffs that made Laura's heart race each time. Nora lined the wooden blocks into a crescent, mimicking the shard on the locket. Emily whispered, "They're repeating it, without even knowing." Rachel pressed her hands to her face. She made everything repetition, chores at exact times. Walks on the same street. Even punishments, always the same words. She called them lessons. Her voice cracked. Every day was a copy of the last. Reynolds studied her, then looked at Laura. "If we're doing this, we do it carefully. That woman, whoever she was, planned routines. If she carved that whistle, she's planning still. and she wants you afraid." David set his mug down hard. "Then let's stop being afraid." But Reynolds didn't smile. That's what she's counting on. By afternoon, the house had turned into a command post. Papers spread across the dining table, coffee cooling in rings, Rachel pacing. Emily worked like a nurse triaging a crisis, sorting evidence into columns, memory, documented, unverified. Reynolds drove them to the boarded-up New Moon resale store. The sign was faded but legible, the Crescent logo cracked like old porcelain. A heavy chain sealed the doors, graffiti curling across the plywood. The parking lot was empty except for weeds forcing through asphalt. Rachel stiffened the moment they stepped out. "It smells the same." "What smell?" Laura asked. "Orange soap," Rachel said, "and spearmint gum. She chewed it all the time." Reynolds tested the lock. New, shiny. Someone's been keeping this closed. He circled the building, beam of his flashlight sweeping windows sealed from inside. Near the back he found a door frame with scratches, fresh wood exposed. Not random. Letters, carved quick, RLB. Rachel's initials. Her knees buckled and Laura caught her before she hit the ground. Inside, through a broken pane, they saw shelves stacked with dust-covered boxes, children's shoes, plastic toys, baby clothes with faded tags. Laura's stomach turned when she spotted a pink jacket sleeve sticking out of one. Reynolds called for backup to get a warrant, but Rachel shook her head violently. "If we wait, she'll clear it. She always clears it when she feels exposed." David stared through the glass, jaw clenched. "She's already sending messages. Stop digging. What do you think this is if not exposure?" Emily turned on him. "And what if we walk into a trap? She's manipulating us the same way she manipulated Rachel." The argument fractured in the wet air. They all knew the truth. Every option was dangerous. At that moment, a police cruiser rolled up. Reynolds frowned. That was fast. But the officer who stepped out wasn't from his unit. A younger man, unfamiliar. His badge glinted, but his nameplate was taped over. He tipped his hat casually. "Got a call about trespassers." Reynolds stiffened. "From who?" The officer shrugged. "Anonymous female caller. Said a family was digging around private property." Laura felt her chest collapse inward. Rachel grabbed her mother's arm. Anonymous female caller. The phrase echoed against every memory. The woman who had stolen Rachel still had a voice in this city. The trespass officer's smile didn't reach his eyes. Rain slid off the brim of his cap in neat streams, but his uniform looked too new, too stiff, as if it had come straight from a costume rack. Detective Reynolds lifted his chin. "Badge," he said. The officer tilted it just enough to flash metal, then let it fall back into shadow. His nameplate was covered with a strip of black tape. "Anonymous caller said you were forcing entry. I'm here to prevent property damage." "Property's evidence," Reynolds replied evenly. "We're waiting on a warrant." He turned slightly, body angling to block Laura and Rachel from the man's view. "Dispatch has your unit as—" The officer chewed once, slow, and smiled. "Spearmint." Rachel's shoulders tightened. "He smells like her gum," she whispered. "Unit?" Reynolds repeated. The man shrugged. "Submitted under special detail." Reynolds didn't blink. "Which one?" "Downtown?" the stranger said, as if saying city answered the question of street. He touched 2 fingers to his cap. "Don't go anywhere." He walked back to his cruiser with that casual, dangerous pace of someone who never leaves quickly, because nothing can touch him. He pulled away without turning on his lights. "Not ours," Reynolds said, and only then exhaled. "No call went out. I'll find out who sent him." He looked at Rachel. "Spearmint." "She chewed it like a metronome," Rachel said, "to time my chores." Reynolds stared at the chained door. "We move now." He had already called for the warrant. While they waited, he dialed a favor. A maintenance truck rolled up. City seal, real this time. A locksmith stepped out, gray mustache and precise hands. "Emergency access," Reynolds said. "Judge's verbal, paper to follow." The chain-kissed metal fell with a thunk, and the door sighed inward. Air slid past them. Dust, cloth, something citrus under everything. Orange soap. Rachel reached for Laura's hand and gripped it hard enough to make Bones remember. The interior looked like a freeze frame of childhood surrendered. Rows of tiny shoes with present tense laces, plastic bins labeled 03 months, 4T57. A desk sat behind the register, its drawer fronts scuffed. On the wall, a crescent moon logo, hand-painted, flaked at the tips as if the night itself had been rubbed thin. Near the back, hidden by a rolling rack, a small office had been built out of plywood, cheap, fast. On its door, a strip of fraying masking tape with a word written in block letters. Lessons. "Our punishments," Rachel said, voice paper thin. She always called them lessons. She touched the tape with 2 fingers, then drew back as if it were hot. Reynolds's flashlight cut a steady path. He pointed to a filing cabinet. Locked. Then to a heavy oak desk that didn't belong in a thrift store, real furniture anchoring a lie. Laura ran her palm across its edge and felt a burr, a roughness in the wood. She crouched and looked under the lip. A sliver of brass winked from a crack in the underside, a hidden keyhole. She pressed, but it refused. Rachel frowned. "Wait." She turned to the pink jacket sleeve half hidden in a bin. It wasn't her coat, wrong brand, wrong buttons, but the crooked seam in her memory tugged her like a string. She looked down at the jacket she had carried for years in the bus duffel, the one Laura had mended when the cuff frayed 2 decades ago. The stitches, strawberry milk pink, were still slightly uneven. She slid her nail under the seam and lifted one stitch gently. Something tiny and cold clicked against her fingertip and fell into her palm, a miniature brass key, no bigger than a raisin. Laura covered her mouth. "I sewed that seam," she whispered. "I must have hidden it when the search turned wild, when the house got strange with visitors. I don't remember doing it, but that's my thread." Reynolds held out his hand. Rachel laid the key on his palm. It slid into the hidden lock under the desk and turned with a small, stubborn surrender. A panel in the desktop sprang up on a hinge. Inside sat a ledger bound in green cloth, a VHS tape with masking tape labeled May 24, lot, and a small leather pouch. The orange soap smell was strongest here, as if the room itself had been washed like hands. Rachel's throat worked around a breath that didn't fit. "That's the day," she said. Reynolds opened the ledger. No names, just initials, dates, and small sums that grew large when page after page carried them forward. RLB. Appeared first as a penciled note, then as ink, then as a stamped line with a check mark. Other sets repeated, MKEAJT, besides some entries, transfer complete, compliance improves, code learned. "Code learned," Emily read, voice flat with anger. "They wrote it down like a curriculum." "Who are MK and EA?" Laura asked. The initials tasted like metal. Reynolds traced a finger down a column. "EA could be Evelyn Adler," he said slowly. "Your neighbor." "And MK?" David asked. "Marjorie Klein," Reynolds answered, eyes sharpening. "Evelyn's younger sister. Changed her name after a foreclosure upstate. She ran pop-up thrift drives, always had a clipboard, always had an excuse to be near kids and overwhelmed moms." He tapped the ledger. "I tried to tie her to a rehoming case in 2002. She slipped it. Paperwork disappeared. Judges retired. Evidence evaporated." His voice lost its evenness. "It stinks the same today." He lifted the leather pouch. Inside, a half-moon pendant, chipped, not Laura's. Another crescent. On its back, scratched with a pin, MK. Rachel's hands shook. She wore that. She said the moon always finds its piece. Reynolds slid the VHS into an old player he'd pulled from his trunk. Evidence kit relics. The monitor on the desk hummed awake, static, then gray, then the Sawyer Point lot on a spring afternoon. The camera angled from a maintenance shed across the grass. People wandered. Balloons bobbed. The time code in the corner matched the hour on the property report. Laura squeezed David's shoulder hard enough to leave moons. A small girl in a pink coat entered frame from the left, a red balloon tethered to her wrist twice. Laura's fingers clawed the desk. "Rachel," she breathed to the screen, as if sound could thread time. The tape ran. A blue Pontiac Sunfire eased along the curb, pausing near the playground shade. The left taillight showed a thin white spiderweb of damage. A woman stepped into frame, not Mrs. Adler, taller, hair-pinned, sunglasses. She crouched to the girl's level and spoke. The girl laughed, the laugh Laura had kept preserved in a jar in her mind. The woman raised 2 fingers to her lips and let out 2 short, 1 long. Rachel looked toward the shade tents as if checking whether someone would answer. No one did. The woman took the balloon string, looped it loosely around her wrist, and led the girl toward the blue car. The woman turned just enough for the camera to catch the angle of her jaw, the particular brightness of a smile that never reached the eyes, the crescent pendant at her throat. Reynolds paused the frame. The pendant threw a small flare of sun. "Marjorie Klein," he said. Laura's body knew the name before her mind accepted it. Paper clattered under her hands. "The anonymous caller that week," she said, barely audible. "The one who said to check a security booth, to look for a blue sedan." "Same woman," Reynolds said. "She phoned tips to control what we saw. When you chase the lead someone gives you, you stop looking everywhere else. It's an old trick." The room refocused. This is the twist, Laura thought, surprised by the sentence forming and then ashamed of it. There had never been a mystery in a story. There had only been the daily arithmetic of a crime that had kept rebalancing itself for 2 decades. "Why carve the whistle at our gate?" Emily asked softly. Reynolds answered without softness. "Because she wants you to know she's writing the next page." A fax tone chirped, an anachronistic bird in the quiet. Reynolds's phone lit with a text from his unit, warrant signed. He let out a breath. "Now it's official." He picked up the ledger again and turned to the last page. The newest entry was dated last month. RLB. Location changed, pending retrieval. Beside it a notation in smaller script, Chicago route, meet at Riverbend. Rachel exhaled a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "I bought tickets to Chicago," she said. "I don't know why I got off early in Charleston. I felt watched on the bus. I felt pre-written." Laura looked from the ledger to her daughter, alive and complicated. "And here." "You untied the string," she said, meaning the invisible one. Rachel lifted her chin. "I broke a rule." Reynolds closed the book. "Then we can break hers." He pointed to a cardboard banker's box stacked beneath the desk, misfiled. On the side, someone had scribbled 1979-2006 donations. When he pried the lid, the top layer revealed envelopes with clipped corners, and beneath, a stack of intake forms stamped with a notary seal. On 3, Laura's name had been forged, not elegant forgery, but practiced. Laura Jane Bennett, consenting to guardianship transfer for safety and moral welfare. Laura stared. The signature flickered at her like a counterfeit photograph. "That is not my hand." Emily's anger came clean and quiet. She needed those to move Rachel without alarms. Paper makes lies wear suits. Reynolds slid the forms into an evidence sleeve. "We'll take the whole desk, and this tape, and the ledger. It's enough to reopen and to kick doors." He looked at Rachel. "If Marjorie wrote pending retrieval last month, she still thinks she can stage manage your life. That makes her reckless." Rachel turned to Laura. "She won't stop with me. She'll come for the kids." She said it plainly, like diagnosis. Laura nodded once. "Then we go home now. We don't give her your address. We change locks. We make a list." Reynolds held her gaze. "I'll post a car on your block. My car. Not a kid with a taped-over badge." He glanced at Emily. You with them? Always, Emily said. They stepped out into the late afternoon. The rain had stopped. The lot smelled like wet cardboard and old coins. The locksmith relocked the chain with a new hasp. As Reynolds turned his key in the cruiser's ignition, his phone buzzed again. A voicemail, 30 seconds, no caller ID. He played it on speaker, static, then a woman's voice. Midwestern vowels, sanded to anonymity. Calm, sweet as spearmint. Detective Reynolds, she said, like a hostess greeting an old friend. Tell Laura that secrets behave better in the dark. Tell Rachel that the moon never loses what belongs to it. And tell the children, a small pause like a smile, that lessons resume soon. The call cut. The silence afterward had weight. Rachel made a small sound in her throat. Laura put her hand at the base of her daughter's neck, steadying an entire day. Home, Laura said. Now. They drove back with the speed of people who have learned their city's arteries by heart. The maple in front of the Bennett house wore rain like a new bark. The porch light, which they had left off, now glowed. Emily was first to the door. It wasn't locked. She pushed it open, heart kicking, nurse-steady hands made clumsy by fear. The living room lay still except for the clock's tin insistence. The couch was empty. The quilts had slid to the floor like skins shed. The whistle lay on the rug, dented mouthpiece pointing toward the hallway. Theo? Laura called, her voice a laced shoe that wouldn't hold. Nora? No answer. A draft moved through the house that shouldn't have existed, with windows shut. David reached the hallway in 3 long strides. He stopped. On the oak dresser, the sticky drawer was open a finger's width. On its lip, in damp fingertip oil, 3 marks had been pressed, 2 short, 1 long. They fanned through the rooms with precision born of 20 years of nightmare rehearsals. Kitchen, empty, a mug still steaming faintly. Laura's, untouched since morning. Back door, latched. Windows latched. Bathroom dry. Basement, bulb humming. The single pull chain swinging slightly. David took the steps 2 at a time. His shout came back crowded with pipes. Nothing! Upstairs, Emily said, already moving. Hallway. The air smelled like orange soap. Theo's room first. Sheets rucked, a toy truck stranded mid-floor, a new baseball glove cradling absence. Nora's room next. 2 dolls sat politely at the tea table, cups tilted, waiting. A 3rd chair pushed back, as if a very patient guest had just stood. Rachel's breath shortened in quick, brave bursts. She doesn't take them without leaving a note. The word tasted like rust. She wants you to watch the empty. A faint sound, almost a mouse inside a wall, tugged Laura toward the closet at the end of the hall, the one that had held winter coats and boxes of baby clothes so long the house thought them load-bearing. She pulled the door wide. On the top shelf sat the cardboard evidence box, not where she'd left it on the dining table. Inside, the flyers had been stacked by height, the tape respooled perfectly, the ring box centered like a punctuation mark, and on top of everything, a Polaroid with wet edges. Theo and Nora asleep on the couch at noon, an adult's shadow falling across them like a sundial's finger. The photo had been taken from the foyer, inside the house, while Laura had been in the kitchen making coffee. Look at the timestamp, Emily whispered. In the white border, someone had written in neat block letters, 11:58 a.m. The pen had bitten through the glossy surface in places, impatient. Rachel's hands hovered over the picture, then withdrew, as if touching it would grant it permission to be real. She was here, while we were all here. Reynolds's jaw went hard as an anvil. Front door wasn't forced. She has a key, or she's better at doors than we are. Laura looked at David, remembering a day, years ago, when he'd handed a spare to a neighbor for packages. Do you ever— Not since, he said. I took them all back. She doesn't need keys, Rachel said, voice going small with old facts. She used to play a game with locks. She'd time herself. She made the shape of a bobby pin in the air. 10 seconds, she'd say. Beat that. They regrouped in the kitchen. Reynolds pulled nitrile gloves from his jacket and began dusting the Polaroid for prints while calling in a real patrol car, giving names that made the dispatcher's voice go formal. Rachel paced. Emily checked the street from the upstairs window. 2 neighbor kids on scooters, their mother on a phone, the ordinary world insulting in its audacity. David lifted the whistle from the rug. The dent fit his thumb perfectly. Sorrow can mold to tools. "She left it facing the hallway," he said, as if the object had a grammar. The doorbell rang. Everyone jumped, then froze. Laura lifted the peephole cover. A delivery driver, mid-20s, baseball cap damp, stood with a medium flat package hugged to his chest. Across the top, Bennett in block marker. "We didn't order anything," Laura said through the door. He shrugged. "Lady tipped me double to drop it right now. Said it was urgent. Said I should say, 'Once more, please.'" He smiled, not understanding how a phrase could unspool a woman's lungs. Laura opened the door as far as the chain would allow. "Who sent it?" He shook his head. "Order came through the app. No sender. She told me to knock 3 times. He mimed the rhythm, precise, evenly spaced. Laura felt the porch under her feet tilt. She slid the chain, took the box, and locked 3 times in return. On the kitchen table, they slit the tape carefully. Inside lay 3 items: a child's workbook with gold stars on the first 2 pages and red X's on the last, a VHS in a cheap clamshell case labeled Lesson, Home, and a single sheet of paper folded twice. On the outside fold, a drawn crescent, open side left, as if waiting to be completed. Rachel refused to let the paper be the first thing. She picked up the workbook. Inside, childish handwriting in pencil answered questions like, "Circle the picture that shows sharing," and "Draw the clock that says 5 o'clock." At the bottom of the last page, where Rachel's small hand had once been corrected for shaky numbers, another hand, adult, had written, "Try again." Rachel's face cracked, and then didn't. "She graded us," she said. "Not just me, us." Emily slid the VHS into the player Reynolds had brought from the shop. The screen blinked. A woman's silhouette filled the frame, a backlit figure by a window. The camera was set on a tripod. "Good afternoon," the woman said, and the room shrank. The voice matched the voicemail, the parking lot tape, every nightmare that had learned how to walk. "Good afternoon, Laura," she said next, and Laura's body went cold. And David, and Emily, who learned to count by tapping the hallway wall, and Rachel. Welcome home again. The silhouette tilted her head. A crescent pendant glowed faintly. "Children, if you're listening, lessons resume when the clock says 5. If we begin on time, we end on time." The figure moved aside. The frame showed a wall with pencil hash marks at small kid height. Beside each hash mark, 2 tiny lines, then 1 long, the whistle code drawn like tally. "Why?" Laura said, the word barely breath. "So you would recognize my handwriting," the woman said, as if answering. "Because even a forgery has a signature." She laughed softly. "Ask your detective about that." Reynolds's jaw tightened. He leaned toward the screen, eyes narrowing at the edges of the frame, the way light skated on a picture frame glass, the reflection of a lampshade, the type of 2-prong outlet near the baseboard. "She's filming inside a house," he murmured. "Not this one. Craftsman trim, newer outlet. Somewhere pre-war but updated. I can work with that." "Open the paper," Rachel said. Laura unfolded the page. Inside, a photocopy, grainy but legible, of the forged guardianship consent with Laura's name scrawled at the bottom. Over it, in neat schooling letters, a message. "Laura, you finally found your key. Once more, please. M." A beat of silence. Then Reynolds's phone buzzed. A text, no ID, a photo loaded, grainy high ISO, like a security cam. It showed the Bennett porch from a low angle, rain dots catching flash. In the lower right corner, a pair of shoes, small Velcro straps. The caption below, 5 o'clock Riverbend. Rachel's head snapped up. She wrote Riverbend in the ledger. The Chicago route. Meet at Riverbend, Emily echoed, eyes hard. It's a site, not a metaphor. Reynolds nodded once, curt. There's a Riverbend Community Center by the river trail. Condemned wing. Backlots. Enough cover. He looked at the clock. 4:22. We're not going, David said, but it sounded like a prayer that already knew its answer. We are, Laura said, surprising herself with how level it came out, but not the way she expects. Rachel squeezed Nora's doll's hand in her pocket like a talisman she'd borrowed and might keep. She expects me to come alone, she said. She expects me to obey the whistle. She expects you to be the little girl who followed, Laura answered. She hasn't met the mother. Reynolds zipped the evidence bag. We'll set the perimeter. We go quiet. We don't give her a stage. He slid a spare radio across the table. You'll stay in the car until I clear... A new notification chimed on Emily's phone. It wasn't a text. It was a live stream link, private, sent to her hospital email. Subject line, once more, please. She tapped before anyone could stop her. The stream opened to a shaky shot of a room, peeling wallpaper, a chalkboard, a window covered in wax paper to soften light. On the chalkboard, a clock face had been drawn in white. The hands crawled toward 5. The camera panned down. 2 small chairs waited. A pair of small sneakers swung just out of frame. A child's whisper threaded the tinny audio. Mom? The stream cut to black. The kitchen filled with the hiss of silence, heavier than static. No one spoke for a full 10 seconds, the kind of silence that rearranges air. Laura's hand stayed on the folded paper, but her knuckles had gone white. She felt the ink bleeding into her skin. They're alive, Rachel whispered first. Her voice cracked, not with doubt, but with the fragile relief of confirmation. She has them, but they're alive. Laura looked at her daughter, grown, scarred, trembling, and recognized in her eyes the same mixture of fear and fight she had once carried when Rachel was missing the first time. 20 years collapsed into an instant. She touched Rachel's cheek. We're not losing you again, and we're not losing them. David's face was stone-carved by sleepless nights. We go, he said. No debate. Reynolds lifted both hands, steady as if taming a frightened animal. We don't charge blind. If Riverbend is where she staged this, it's not random. She knows cameras, she knows sound. She wants witnesses, even if it's just us. She's writing theater. Emily crossed her arms, jaw trembling. So what? We play her game? No, Reynolds said. We change the ending. He called in 2 trusted officers, people who had worked under him long enough to know when not to file every detail in open channels. They'd meet near Riverbend Community Center, abandoned, condemned, half its windows shattered, graffiti crawling the brick like ivy. On the drive, Laura sat with Rachel and Emily in the back. Rachel clutched the whistle in one hand, the locket in the other, as if holding both past and present might keep her from being torn between them. Emily reached over and laced their fingers. She hadn't done that since childhood. Once more, please, she whispered, not as command but as vow. At Riverbend, the parking lot was deserted except for 2 patrol cars, darkened like sleeping dogs. Weeds pushed through cracked asphalt. The building loomed with boarded windows and one light glowing where no power should run. Reynolds gathered them by the trunk. This isn't rescue yet, it's survival. She'll want to prove control first. Expect recordings. Expect her voice in places she isn't. But remember, she wants audience more than blood. That's leverage. They moved as if rehearsing. Reynolds and his men flanked the west side. David held the flashlight like a weapon. Emily carried the Polaroid, refusing to let it leave her sight. Rachel stepped forward first, her shoulders squared, mother and daughter in one body. The front door of the condemned wing stood ajar. Inside, a faint glow pulsed, as if a projector had been left running in the dark. A chalkboard leaned against the far wall. On it, a clock face was drawn in white chalk, hands fixed at 5. 2 chairs sat beneath it, small and waiting, and on one chair, a doll with button eyes and a crooked smile. On the other, a folded paper. Laura crossed the threshold and picked it up. "Welcome to your lesson." The air in the abandoned classroom smelled like chalk dust and something sharper, orange soap clinging to wood that hadn't been washed in years. A speaker hissed in the corner, then clicked alive. "Once more, please," a woman's voice cooed. "You followed the trail. You always do." "Isn't it comforting to know you're still predictable?" Rachel stiffened, clutching the whistle. "Where are they?" The voice ignored her. "Children learn best when parents make mistakes, so we'll replay. 2 short, 1 long. You remember how?" David cursed under his breath. Reynolds signaled them to stay quiet, scanning the room. He found the wire, cheap, running to a battery pack hidden behind the chalkboard. But the voice wasn't live. It was a recording, looped. Laura looked at the doll on the chair. Its left sleeve had been torn and restitched, sloppy, fast, with thread the color of strawberry milk. Her stomach turned. She knelt and tugged gently at the seam. Something small rattled inside, a flash drive. She held it up to Reynolds, who slipped it into a reader. On his portable monitor, folders appeared. Videos, dates spanning 20 years. Labeled not by names, but by codes, RLB1, MK2, EA7. He opened the latest file. Theo and Nora sat in a dim room, eating crackers, looking tired but unhurt. Behind them, chalk hash marks decorated the wall, 2 short, 1 long, repeated in rows. "They're alive," Reynolds confirmed. His voice, for once, trembled. Laura reached for the screen, her fingertips brushing static. "Hold on, babies," she whispered. Rachel pressed the whistle to her lips, but Laura covered her hand. "No, not her signal, ours." They huddled, fear and fury braided together. For the first time in 20 years, the Bennetts weren't just reacting to lessons written for them. They were writing one of their own. Emily looked at her mother, then at Rachel. "What's the plan?" Laura's eyes, lit by the faint projector glow, held both exhaustion and iron. "We stopped being students," the speaker hissed again. The voice returned, almost amused. "Remember, 5 o'clock sharp. You don't want to disappoint me." Reynolds checked his watch. 4:58. 2 minutes left. And in those 2 minutes, the family understood. The next move wasn't Marjorie Klein's, it was theirs. The second hand on Reynolds's watch seemed louder than the rain outside. 4:59. The room held its breath. Laura stood at the center of the old classroom, flash drive clutched in one hand, her daughters flanking her, David at her back. When the clock struck 5, nothing exploded, no alarms blared. Instead, a projector hummed to life. On the peeling wall bloomed a grainy video feed, live this time. Theo and Nora sat in 2 child-sized chairs, crayons scattered on a table. Behind them, chalk lines, 2 short, 1 long. And then the woman. Marjorie Klein stepped into frame, older now, hair silver at the edges, but the same smile carved like a mask. She wore the crescent pendant at her throat, glinting in the light. "Good evening, Bennetts," she said smoothly, as if greeting guests at a dinner party. "You've done well. You've followed just as you were meant to." She touched Theo's hair lightly, making Laura's stomach twist. "The moon never loses what belongs to it." Rachel took a step forward, fury radiating from her bones. "They're not yours. They never were." Marjorie laughed, the sound small and sharp. "I shaped you, Rachel. Every lesson, every rule. My handwriting is on your bones. You think escape makes you free? No, it only brings you back to me." Laura pressed a hand against the desk to steady herself. "You're wrong," she said aloud, though she knew Marjorie couldn't hear through the feed. "Love leaves a stronger mark than fear." Reynolds studied the reflection in the projector glass. "She's not far," he murmured. "The delay's too short. Less than a mile. She's streaming local." Emily's eyes blazed. "Then we end this tonight." The projector flickered. Marjorie leaned closer to the camera. "One final lesson," she said. "Obedience. If you want them safe, bring Rachel alone to the riverbank in 10 minutes. Otherwise, she lifted the whistle. 2 short, 1 long. Theo flinched. The feed cut. Rachel's breath came fast. She'll hurt them if I don't go. Laura gripped her shoulders. And she'll hurt them if you do. That's her script. We don't read it anymore. Reynolds snapped his radio. Units, converge on Riverbend North Bank. Silent entry. She's on site with 2 minors. Suspect is female, late 50s, possible accomplices. His voice was a knife honed over decades. David squeezed Laura's hand once, an anchor. We end it. They moved out together into the wet twilight toward the river that had started everything. The Riverbend North Bank smelled of silt and wet iron. Street lamps buzzed. The family stayed behind Reynolds and his officers, every step heavy with 20 years of echoes. They found her near a derelict boathouse. A single lantern glowed on the dock. Theo and Nora sat on a blanket, crayons still in hand, as if the performance demanded continuity. And Marjorie stood above them, the whistle at her lips. 2 short, 1 long, she called softly across the water. Come, Rachel. But it wasn't Rachel who stepped forward. It was Laura. She walked past Reynolds, past David's outstretched hand. Her voice carried steady. Once more, please. The phrase hit Marjorie like a stone through glass. Her smile faltered. What did you say? Laura's eyes locked on hers. Once more, please. That's mine, not yours. That was how I asked my daughters to try again. You stole it, like you stole everything else. But tonight, I'm taking it back. Marjorie's hand shook. For the first time, the whistle wavered. Theo reached for Nora's hand. The children stood, and in that fragile distraction, Reynolds's officers moved, swift, quiet, decisive. The whistle clattered against the dock. It was over in seconds. Marjorie Klein, the woman who had rewritten their lives for 20 years, was finally in custody. Rachel ran to her children. She dropped to her knees, clutching them so tightly they squealed, then laughed through tears. Laura pressed her forehead to her daughter's back. The 3 generations wrapped in a knot no hand could untie. Emily leaned against David, her shoulders shaking. For once the silence around them wasn't fear. It was relief. Later at the station, Reynolds placed the ledger, the VHS tapes, and the forged documents into evidence. This time, he told them, paper won't disappear. We've got her. Outside, the night had cleared. The river whispered against the banks. Laura stood with Rachel, Theo, and Nora beside her. She reached into her pocket and held up the crescent shard that had waited in a porcelain bowl for 20 years. Rachel lifted the locket. They fit together, imperfect, scarred, but whole enough to shine under the street lamp. Laura's voice was quiet but firm. She wanted lessons. Here's mine. Love remembers what fear tries to erase. Rachel kissed her children's heads. Emily took her mother's hand, and David, weary but unbroken, whispered what none of them had dared for decades. We're home. The night folded into itself, but the whistle code no longer belonged to Marjorie. It belonged to them again. 2 short, 1 long. A signal not for control, but for family, answering across years, across silence, across everything stolen.